In the late 1960s, Northern California was a vibrant tableau of cultural revolution and youthful optimism, a landscape colored by the free-spirited ethos of an era eager for change. Yet beneath this surface of societal transformation, a shadow was silently spreading, one that would forever alter the region's collective consciousness. It was during this seemingly idyllic time that the Zodiac Killer emerged, shattering the peace with a reign of terror whose psychological grip still haunts America's history. Between December 1968 and October 1969, the Zodiac Killer etched a terrifying pattern across Northern California's geography. His attacks stretched from the quiet town of Benicia to the industrial outskirts of Vallejo, from the rural expanses of Napa County to the bustling, diverse neighborhoods of San Francisco. This geographic spread marked him as a predator who was both familiar with and unfettered by the sprawling urban and suburban landscapes he haunted. Each strike was a calculated imprint not just on his victims, but on the psyche of an entire public. The first known attack unfolded on December 20, 1968, on Lake Herman Road, a lover's lane near Benicia. Here, young David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, aged 17 and 16 respectively, became the Zodiac's initial victims. The killer's approach was methodical and chillingly direct. He parked beside their car and fired multiple shots, killing Faraday instantly and fatally wounding Jensen as she fled. Authorities found no witnesses, no tire marks that clearly led away, no prints to trace. The absence of clues painted the attack as the work of a calculating madman, a ghost in the tranquil night. On July 4, 1969, the Zodiac struck again at Blue Rock Springs Park near Vallejo. This time, Michael Mageau and Darlene Ferrin were targeted. The killer's method was similar. The beam of a flashlight suddenly pointed into the car window, followed swiftly by gunfire from a 9mm pistol. Ferrin was killed, but Mageau survived, his injuries grievous yet his eyewitness account invaluable. Mageau's description of a heavy-set white man with a large face and curly light brown hair offered the first tangible glimpse of the man behind the mask. Remarkably, mere moments after the attack, a phone call was placed to Vallejo police from a nearby payphone. The caller calmly claimed responsibility for the murders at both Blue Rock Springs and Lake Herman Road. It was the Zodiac announcing himself, crafting a persona that would send ripples of fear across communities far beyond his immediate victims. The killer's audacity escalated. On September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa in Napa County, the Zodiac revealed a darker theatricality. Bryan Hartnell and Cecelia Shepard were relaxing beside the lake when a figure emerged. This time, the assassin wore a hood evocative of executioner's garb, emblazoned with a crosshair symbol that would become his infamous signature. The victims were bound and viciously stabbed, Hartnell 6 times. In the back, Shepard 10 times as she desperately resisted. Hartnell survived, but Shepard succumbed days later. In a brazen act of defiance and self-promotion, the Zodiac etched a message on Hartnell's car door listing the dates of his previous attacks and signing it with his menacing symbol. This act was no mere proclamation. It was an assertion of control and ownership over the terror he inflicted. The final confirmed murder in this spree occurred on October 11, 1969, in San Francisco's affluent Presidio Heights. Paul Stine, a 29-year-old taxi driver, was shot and killed in his cab. This killing marked a shift. No longer attacking isolated couples, the Zodiac demonstrated a new reach, targeting a lone individual in an urban environment. Importantly, the killer took a piece of Stine's blood-stained shirt and sent it to the San Francisco Chronicle, offering irrefutable proof of his culpability. This act silenced skeptics and underscored his need not just to kill, but to authenticate his legend. Throughout these attacks, a pattern of brutal adaptability emerged. The Zodiac employed different weapons, a .22 caliber pistol for initial shootings, a 9mm in Vallejo, and a knife at Lake Berryessa, revealing a willingness to vary his modus operandi. Victim selection was initially young couples in secluded locations, vulnerable and isolated, but later extended to a lone cab driver in an urban setting, perhaps signifying a broadening scope or a tactical evolution aimed at further instilling public fear. Yet what truly set the Zodiac apart from other killers was not solely his brutality or choice of victims, but his calculated communication with the world beyond the crime scenes. He did not vanish quietly into the darkness. Instead, he engaged in a psychological warfare that blurred lines between reality and spectacle. Beginning with letters sent to major Bay Area newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, Examiner, and the Vallejo Times, the Zodiac crafted a persona that lurked not only in shadows but in headlines, captivating and terrifying the public simultaneously. He coined the chilling moniker Zodiac in a letter dated August 4, 1969, and paired it with a distinctive crosshair symbol, a graphic representation of both precision and menace. This was not coincidental branding. It was an intentional construction of an identity designed to provoke fear and fascination. His communications often began with the haunting phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking," a declaration that announced his presence and set the tone for a macabre dialogue. Within the cryptic letters were detailed descriptions of the murders known only to the killer and law enforcement, accurate information on ammunition caliber, number of shots fired, and later, even the blood-stained shirt fragment from Stine's murder. These elements conveyed undeniable authenticity, confirming to the public and police alike that this was no hoaxer but the very architect of the terror gripping the region. His letters also contained dark demands. They insisted that the newspapers publish his cryptic ciphers prominently, failing which he threatened further violence. This compelled the media to participate in the killer's game, unwittingly amplifying his notoriety and feeding public panic. The communications were punctuated by distinctive misspellings such as Christmas and Paradis, further adding layers of psychological complexity, whether genuine errors or deliberate obfuscation. Perhaps most chilling were the riddles of his ciphers. In July 1969, he sent a message known as the Z408 cipher, promising that it contained his identity. The puzzle, long thought unsolvable by authorities, was cracked within a week by amateur codebreakers Donald and Betty Harden, revealing the Zodiac's twisted motive: "I like killing people because it is so much fun," and his disturbing belief in collecting slaves for the afterlife. Despite this revelation, the cipher offered no real name, with the killer mockingly declaring he would not give his name, deepening his enigma. Months later, the Zodiac sent another perplexing cipher, Z340, which would stump experts for over 50 years until its 2020 breakthrough by a global team of independent codebreakers. Even today, the remaining ciphers remain uncracked, their secrets locked away in a puzzle that continues to arrest the imaginations of professionals and amateurs alike. Through a chilling combination of indiscriminate violence, public taunts, and cryptic puzzles, the Zodiac Killer did not merely commit crimes, he staged a public performance of fear. His signature symbol, his self-bestowed name, and his cryptic communications created a mythology that transcended the Bay Area. This figure was not just a murderer. He was a dark reflection of a society grappling with its own fears, vulnerabilities, and the unsettling notion that evil can wear a mask and speak directly into the collective consciousness. As the late 1960s gave way to the uncertainty of the 1970s, Northern California was left to grapple with this shadow that loomed far larger than the killer himself. The Zodiac's reign of terror and game of cryptic communication established the foundation for a decades-long obsession, an unfolding labyrinth of psychological horror, investigative challenge, and cultural impact that continues to resonate. The persona he forged through his symbol and letters transformed a string of local tragedies into a narrative of national infamy, ensuring that the Zodiac name would become synonymous with mystery, fear, and the enduring pursuit of answers hidden in the shadows. This chilling emergence over Northern California was not just the story of murders, but the birth of a killer's identity, a psychological puzzle that would captivate generations. What began in the quiet darkness of lovers' lanes would echo through the corridors of history, inviting us to peer into the abyss and wrestle with questions that remain unanswered. As we begin to unravel the layers of this case, the stage is set for a journey into the human faces behind the victims, the complex crime scenes, the tantalizing letters, and the relentless pursuit that follows. The shadows over Northern California cast by the Zodiac Killer are long and deep, marking the beginning of a story where fear, fascination, and the unknown intertwine in a deadly dance. In the story of the Zodiac Killer, it's all too easy to become lost in the chilling headlines, the cryptic letters, and the unresolved mysteries. But beyond the shadow cast by this infamous figure lie the deeply human stories of the victims, the lives cut tragically short, the families left to grapple with grief, and the community's forever changed. Our journey begins on a cold December night in 1968 on a quiet stretch of Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. Two teenagers, David Arthur Faraday, aged 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, just 16, pursued a simple moment of youthful privacy, parked at a secluded lover's lane. David and Betty Lou were high school sweethearts, full of dreams and the promise of their future together. What happened that night was swift and brutal. A man pulled alongside their car, approached the driver's side, and opened fire with a .22 caliber pistol. As they tried to flee, David was struck in the head and Betty Lou was shot multiple times in the back. The cruelty of their deaths changed the landscape of innocent teenage romance into a scene of horror. Their families were shattered, their small community shaken to its core by the senseless violence. Less than 7 months later, the terror returned. It was just past midnight on July 4, 1969, in Vallejo's Blue Rock Springs Park when another young couple became targets. Michael Renaud Mageau, 19, and Darlene Elizabeth Ferrin, 22, had been spending time together when a man shone a flashlight into their car window and opened fire with a 9mm pistol. Darlene succumbed to her wounds, but Michael survived, playing a critical role in the investigation by providing the first eyewitness description of the assailant. He described a heavy-set white man, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a broad face and curly light brown hair. Michael's miraculous survival became a beacon of hope amidst the growing darkness, an enduring testament to the resilience of the human spirit amid violence. But the Zodiac's brutality did not end there. On September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa in Napa County, 2 young college students, Bryan Hartnell, age 20, and Cecelia Shepard, 22, were enjoying a calm afternoon by the lake when their peace was shattered. A man approached wearing an executioner's hood emblazoned with the Zodiac's now infamous crosshair symbol. With chilling calculation, the killer bound them with plastic clothesline, then savagely attacked them with a large knife. Bryan was stabbed 6 times but survived. Cecelia, fighting desperately for her life, was stabbed 10 times and died 2 days later. In a terrifying act of arrogance, the Zodiac then etched a message onto Bryan's car door, claiming responsibility for the murders and cruelly listing the dates of his prior attacks. This act extended his cruelty from just physical violence to psychological torment, gloating over his crimes in a defacement meant to haunt and intimidate. The final, confirmed murder took place on October 11, 1969, in San Francisco's Presidio Heights neighborhood. Paul Lee Stine, a 29-year-old taxi driver, was shot and killed in his cab, a stark departure from previous attacks on couples. This time, the killer left behind a piece of physical evidence, a blood-stained section of Stine's shirt, which he mailed directly to the San Francisco Chronicle along with a letter. This gruesome trophy ended any doubt about his involvement in the crime and underscored his willingness to stoke fear by manipulating media and police alike. Each victim was more than a statistic. David, Betty Lou, Michael, Darlene, Bryan, Cecelia, and Paul were sons and daughters, neighbors, friends, and beacons within their communities. Their families endured unimaginable grief, grappling with loss amid the uncertainty of a killer who remained elusive. The sudden and violent disruption of their lives rippled outwards, touching everyone who knew them and casting a long, haunting shadow on Northern California. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were youthful, their lives brimming with the promise of innocence and future stories yet to be told. Their families searched for answers that never arrived, left to confront the lingering silence where their voices once resonated. Michael Mageau, surviving his attack, became a critical figure in the unfolding saga, a living witness forced to carry the weight of trauma alongside the hope that his ordeal might yield justice. Darlene Ferrin's life was marked not only by her tragic death but by the love and warmth she brought to those around her, a story cut abruptly short. Bryan Hartnell's survival from a brutal stabbing left both physical and emotional scars, a testament to miraculous endurance amid horrifying violence. Cecelia Shepard's fight for life was valiant but tragically ended too soon. Her story reminds us of the fragility of life and the profound loss experienced by the community. Paul Stine was a working man, a taxi driver whose murder broke the couple targeting pattern and introduced a new, chilling dimension to the killer's reign. The families of these victims faced not only grief but the agonizing uncertainties that come with a killer who taunted authorities and refused to be caught. Communities in Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, and San Francisco were gripped with fear, a collective anxiety born from the randomness of the attacks and the killer's mystifying calls and letters. The Zodiac's victims were no longer isolated tragedies but a pattern of horror that haunted families, friends, and neighbors alike. Through their stories, we glimpse the profound human cost behind a case that often seems abstract in headlines and statistics. These stories of love and life abruptly ended, of survival against staggering odds, of families and communities forever changed, serve as our emotional anchor. They remind us that behind the multidisciplinary investigation, the cryptic letters, and the mythos of the Zodiac lies the real and painful truth. Innocent people lost, forever silenced by a predatory and calculating killer. Listening to their stories, we honor their memory and open a gateway of empathy that transcends time and geography, connecting us intimately with the shadows that linger over Northern California's darkest nights. As we reflect on the victims' silent stories, it becomes clear that this case is not just about unraveling a mystery. It is about bearing witness to those lives stolen, those families forever marked, and the enduring human spirit that rises in the face of such unspeakable loss. Their memories invite us to continue the search for justice and understanding, to never let their stories fade into the silence. It is through remembering them that the chilling legacy of the Zodiac Killer gains its most profound meaning. With these human faces now clearly in focus, we can begin to turn toward the crime scenes themselves, the brutal, eerie settings where terror unfolded and where investigators first grappled with the enormity of the Zodiac's chilling presence. Let us carry the weight of their stories forward as we delve into the details of those fateful nights, the police response, and the early attempts to unlock the dark enigma that the Zodiac Killer represented. The nights of Northern California in the late 1960s bore silent witness to a darkness that transcended the shadows. It was not just the absence of light, but something far more sinister that crept through the secluded landscapes and quiet streets, an ominous presence that would soon shake the very foundations of law enforcement and terrorize communities with an audacity never before seen. This is the story of blood and letters, the crime scenes and early investigations that marked the beginning of the Zodiac Killer's horrific reign. The brutality of the Zodiac's first known attack on December 20, 1968, set a chilling tone for what was to follow. On a cold December night along Lake Herman Road in Benicia, two young lovers, David Faraday and Lou Jensen, sought solitude in the quiet retreat of a lover's lane. Their moment of peace was shattered brutally. The killer's approach was strategic and coldly deliberate. Parking just feet from the victim's car, he advanced and opened fire with a .22 caliber pistol before they could escape. David was shot in the head, his life ending instantly. Lou, in a desperate bid for survival, fled but was met with 6 fatal shots to her back. The quiet road bore no witnesses other than the darkness itself. Investigators found no tire tracks or footprints to trace, no immediate clues, only the hollow certainty that a madman prowled these shadows. Just months later, the audacity escalated. In the early hours of July 4, 1969, Michael Mageau and Darlene Ferrin faced terror at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. This time, the killer wielded a 9mm pistol, firing into their car after shining a flashlight into the interior. Darlene was killed at the scene. Michael survived against the odds, shot in his arm and neck, and his testimony was the first glimpse victims and investigators had of the man behind these atrocities, a heavy-set white man with distinctive curly light brown hair. What made this attack unforgettable beyond the violence was what came next. Mere moments after the shooting, a taunting phone call to the Vallejo Police Department claimed responsibility not only for this attack, but also for the earlier one on Lake Herman Road. The killer's calm voice marked the beginning of a psychological warfare, transforming law enforcement's role from simple investigators into players in a deadly game. But the killer's theatrics began to evolve even further. On September 27, 1969, the scene shifted to the tranquil shores of Lake Berryessa in Napa County. Here, the killer embraced ritualistic cruelty. Bryan Hartnell and Cecelia Shepard were approached by a man donning a black executioner's hood emblazoned with the crosshair symbol that would become the Zodiac's sinister signature. They were tied with pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline, immobilized as the killer plunged a large knife repeatedly into Bryan's back and Cecelia's torso in a frenzy of violence. Cecelia succumbed to her wounds days later. Bryan survived, his testimony adding to the mounting evidence against this shadowy figure. Yet, the true chilling hallmark of this scene lay in the calculated message left behind. Carved deeply into Hartnell's car door were the dates of the killer's previous assaults and his unmistakable crosshair symbol, a defiant claim of ownership over the terror inflicted. The audacity culminated just weeks later, on October 11, 1969, with the murder of Paul Stine, a San Francisco taxi driver. In an urban setting far removed from the desolation of lovers' lanes and lake shores, the killer struck with swift precision. But unlike previous crimes, this murder was followed by a deliberate act meant to validate his claims to the public and police alike, sending a piece of Stine's blood-stained shirt to the San Francisco Chronicle along with a taunting letter. The act silenced skeptics and cemented the Zodiac's brazen control over the narrative, underscoring his chilling message. He was always watching, always in control. The weapons used, the .22 and 9mm pistols and the coarse knife, were instruments not just of death but of terror, chosen with calculated intent. The killer's ever-changing methods, from shooting to elaborate stabbing, spoke of a mind both meticulous and unpredictable, capable of evolving tactics to keep authorities off balance. His trademark hood was more than disguise. It was theatrical, a mask crafted to intensify fear and mystery. Policing this unprecedented threat was a monumental challenge. The late 1960s were a time of limited forensic capabilities. Fingerprints were sought religiously, but the Zodiac's frequent use of gloves shielded his identity. Ballistics offered some avenues but were hampered by limitations in technology and the intermittent use of different weapons. The fragile evidence, including crucial fingerprints lifted from letters and crime scenes, often degraded or failed to match suspects. DNA analysis, now considered a linchpin in cold case investigation, was decades away, leaving investigators grappling with a cold trail. As authorities grappled with these hurdles, the Zodiac intensified his psychological game. The killer's taunting phone calls, calm, calculated, and chilling, transformed the investigation into a mind game. Each call was a demonstration of power, a reminder that he was steps ahead, controlling not only the crime scenes but also the public's fear and the conversations surrounding his rampage. This shift from physical menace to psychological warfare elevated the stakes, turning law enforcement's pursuit into a complex battle where the rules were dictated by the Zodiac. Recognizing the scale and complexity of the threat, various local jurisdictions, Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, San Francisco, began to collaborate, pooling resources and sharing information to unravel the killer's puzzle. Such multi-agency cooperation was unprecedented for the time but necessary given the killer's geographic spread and elusive nature. The FBI, though limited in its direct involvement due to jurisdictional boundaries, provided critical support. Their expertise in handwriting analysis linked the carved message on Hartnell's car to the Zodiac's letters, offering irrefutable proof of the killer's signature. Cryptanalysis teams worked tirelessly on the ciphers sent along with the letters, hoping to crack the codes and uncover the killer's identity. Yet even their efforts were constrained by the era's technological limits. These early investigations were marked by frustration but also set the foundation for decades of pursuit. The crimes were horrific, the killer's methods bafflingly varied, and his psychological tactics unprecedented. Every element, from the choice of weapons to the carved symbols, the taunting calls to the collaborative law enforcement response, painted a portrait of a murderer who was not just violent, but theatrical and cunning. This section of the case, Blood and Letters, reveals not only the brutality and chilling symbolisms of the Zodiac Killer's crimes, but also the profound challenges faced by 1960s investigators. It was a time when technology lagged behind the killer's ingenuity, when fear was amplified by cryptic communications, and when a fragmented policing landscape struggled to unite against a shadow that threatened an entire region. As the investigation shifted into the public eye, propelled by the killer's own hand through letters and calls, the Zodiac became more than just a murderer. He became a psychological enigma, commanding attention and eluding justice, a dark symbol etched into the annals of crime. In the following chapters, we will delve deeper into the cryptic messages that both fascinated and haunted a community, and explore the relentless pursuit that has spanned decades, all tracing back to these first, chilling crime scenes and the birth of a mythic, terrifying figure known only as the Zodiac. The late 1960s in Northern California bore witness not only to the vibrant cultural shifts of the era, but also to a sinister presence that would forever fracture the peace of the region. This was the Zodiac Killer, a shadowy figure whose crimes were as notorious for their brutality as for the chilling psychological warfare waged against the public and authorities alike. At the core of this terror campaign lay a series of letters, cryptic ciphers, and a self-fashioned identity that blurred the lines between reality and a macabre theatrical performance. The very name, Zodiac, first proclaimed in his letter to the San Francisco Examiner in August of 1969, was not just a label but a crafted persona. Alongside this, he introduced an eerie signature, a crosshair-like symbol, that would become his hallmark, emblazoned on his chilling communications and crime scene graffiti alike. These elements were not random. They were deliberate tools designed to instill fear, command media attention, and amplify his sense of power. The Zodiac was no mere killer. He was a performer in a brutal game, orchestrating his narrative through letters that demanded publication in newspapers, threatening continued violence should his demands be ignored. His correspondence was replete with dark threats, grotesque boasting, and distinctive misspellings that both served to unsettle readers and frustrate analysts. He declared his intent to collect slaves for the afterlife, a haunting phrase that spoke to a twisted worldview, one where death was a gateway to dominion over victims beyond the mortal plane. This chilling ideology was laid bare in his letters, revealing not just a desire to kill, but a grandiose and perverse fantasy driving the murders. Central to the Zodiac's psychological arsenal were his cryptic ciphers, complex puzzles embedded within his letters. Among these, four stand out: the Z408, Z340, Z13, and Z32 ciphers. Each carried the promise of unlocking crucial secrets, possibly even his true identity, yet many years passed without resolution. The first cipher, the Z408, made its debut in July 1969. Comprising 408 characters split into sections sent to multiple newspapers, it was the Zodiac's bold promise that this puzzle contained his name. But rather than a straightforward confession, the cipher wove a dark manifesto filled with misspellings and cryptic statements. Within days, the cipher was famously decrypted by a determined amateur duo, Donald and Betty Harden. The Hardens, leveraging linguistic intuition and patience, cracked the code, revealing a macabre confession. The killer admitted to enjoying the act of killing because it gave him a thrilling experience, more so than hunting wild game, and boasted that when he died he would be reborn in paradise, where all his victims would serve as his slaves. Notably, the cipher concluded with the declaration, "I will not give you my name," underscoring the twisted cat and mouse dynamic that the Zodiac relished. Yet the Zodiac's cryptic challenges were far from over. Just months later, in November 1969, he sent the Z340 cipher, a 340-character cryptogram that proved impervious to decades of cryptanalysis efforts by top investigators and agencies including the FBI and NSA. It wasn't until 2020 that a breakthrough finally arrived, an international collaboration of private citizens united by determination and cutting-edge technology. American software engineer David Faraday, Australian mathematician Sam Blake, and Belgian programmer Jarl van Eyck pooled their expertise to decipher the enigmatic Z340 with the aid of specialized software. The decrypted message reiterated the killer's disdain for authorities, denial of rumors linking him to a television show appearance, and chillingly reaffirmed his belief in an afterlife where he possessed dominion over slaves procured through his killings. Still, crucially, his name remained elusive, and the puzzle of his true identity deepened. Beyond these two major solved ciphers were the yet unbroken Z13 and Z32. The Z13, transmitted in April 1970 and preceded by the tantalizing phrase "My name is," suggested tantalizingly close glimpses into the Zodiac's identity but tantalized investigators with continued silence. The Z32, sent 2 months later along with a cryptic map marking a cross circle on Mount Diablo, hinted at locations and threats but resisted all attempts at meaningful decryption. These letters and ciphers combined to form an intricate tapestry of psychological warfare. The Zodiac's use of misspellings, such as Christmas and Paradise, might have been genuine errors, but they also served as strategic obfuscations, further frustrating analysts and reinforcing his enigmatic persona. His demands for the publication of his letters in specific newspapers under threat of further violence underscored a manipulative desire to control not only the police investigation but public consciousness itself. Every communication was a piece of a larger performance, a grand, terrifying game in which the Zodiac claimed mastery. Through these correspondences, the Zodiac engaged in a perverse dialogue, taunting law enforcement, the media, and the public. The chilling tone of the letters, the cryptic puzzles that challenged expert and amateur codebreakers alike, and the symbolic use of the crosshair imprint combined to elevate this case beyond a series of brutal murders into a cultural and psychological enigma. The ciphers initially served as a direct line to his disturbed psyche, offering chilling insights without revealing his true identity, perpetuating the mystery that has captivated and confounded experts for generations. This fusion of brutality and intellectual audacity carved the Zodiac's legacy deep into America's dark history, a shadow cast not only by his confirmed killings, but by the cryptic trail he left in print. His psychological manipulation through letters and ciphers created a haunting narrative, fostering an obsession that endures even as unanswered questions persist. As the deadly footsteps of the Zodiac echoed through Northern California, so too did his written words, a spectral voice from behind the mask, forever leaving behind puzzling riddles and chilling threats that remain, to this day, a silent challenge to those who dare to decode the darkness. The unraveling of his ciphers continues to unlock fragments of his twisted mind, while the unsolved mysteries beckon to a future where perhaps, at last, the shadow might be decoded and the silence broken. The pursuit of the Zodiac Killer marked one of the most complex and frustrating manhunts in American criminal history. From the outset, it was clear that local law enforcement agencies faced a daunting adversary, not just a violent murderer, but a master of psychological manipulation who thrived on taunting the authorities and the public alike. After the first horrific attacks, investigators from the Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, Solano County, and San Francisco police departments quickly realized the urgency and gravity of the situation. Yet, the case was complicated by jurisdictional issues, since the attacks crossed city and county lines, making coordination a significant logistical hurdle. Despite this, collaboration became essential as the killer's reach expanded. Recognizing the technical challenges posed by the case, local agencies enlisted the support of the FBI, which provided critical forensic expertise. This included detailed handwriting analysis aimed at linking the Zodiac's letters to suspects, cryptanalysis teams dedicated to deciphering the complex ciphers, and forensic scientists attempting to extract fingerprints and other physical evidence from crime scenes and mailed correspondences. The FBI's involvement elevated the investigation's resources, though it remained primarily a local law enforcement-driven effort. However, despite these efforts, investigators were hampered by the forensic limitations of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Technologies we now take for granted, such as DNA analysis, were non-existent. The killer's habit of wearing gloves and meticulously avoiding leaving fingerprints further eroded the evidence pool. Ballistics, at the time, could provide some connective tissue between cases, but the Zodiac's use of different weapons, .22 caliber pistol, 9mm pistol, and knife compounded difficulties. Handwriting analysis connected letters to crime scene messages, but such comparisons were subjective and inconclusive without corroborating evidence. Faced with these obstacles, law enforcement turned to psychological profiling to better understand the Zodiac's motivations and behavior patterns. Behavioral analysts painted a chilling portrait. The Zodiac was most likely a white male in his late 20s to early 30s, intelligent, calculating, and exhibiting psychopathic traits. His letters revealed striking narcissism and a profound desire for control over his victims and society at large. The carefully constructed persona, the use of cryptic ciphers, and the theatrical elements of his crimes suggested a killer who relished the power dynamics of the hunt. This man was socially isolated, possibly with a background in the military or law enforcement, possessing detailed knowledge of weapons and tactics. The psychological profile offered law enforcement a lens through which to assess suspects, but it was far from a definitive identification. The ambiguity of the Zodiac's behavior and his adaptability in choosing victims and methods made it a challenge to pin him down. Over the decades, several primary suspects emerged, each with its own complex web of evidence for and against. Arthur Lee Allen remains the most well-known and officially named suspect by police. A former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender, Allen's profile seemed to fit in some respects. Notably, Michael Mageau, the surviving victim of the Blue Rock Springs attack, identified Allen in a photo lineup. Allen reportedly owned a Zodiac Seawolf wristwatch emblazoned with a crosshair symbol eerily similar to the Zodiac's signature marking. Robert Graysmith, the author whose books popularized the case, heavily spotlighted Allen as the prime suspect. However, there were significant doubts. Handwriting analysis did not match Allen's writing to that of the Zodiac's letters, and DNA extracted from a Zodiac letter stamp in 2002 did not match Allen, though this evidence was inconclusive, partly due to the possibility that others licked mail stamps for him. Further, fingerprints from the crime scenes did not correspond with Allen's. Conflicting witness descriptions regarding the killer's height, build, and features also worked against a conclusive identification. Earl Van Best Jr., a lesser-known but controversial suspect, entered the public eye largely through the efforts of his biological son, Gary Stewart. Stewart published a book claiming his father was the Zodiac, citing a strong resemblance between Van Best and the police composite sketch, as well as cryptic clues supposedly hidden in Zodiac ciphers. However, subsequent investigations revealed possible manipulation of police records, and forensic evidence, handwriting, fingerprints, and DNA failed to link Van Best to the crimes. Stewart's claims, while compelling to some, remain widely debated and unproven. More recently, Gary Francis' post was identified by an independent investigative group called the Casebreakers in 2021. They claimed DNA evidence connected Post to the murder of Cherie Jo Bates, a case occasionally linked to the Zodiac. However, law enforcement agencies, including those in Riverside County where Bates was killed, maintain that she is not a confirmed Zodiac victim, and official police continue to assert that no definitive evidence ties Post to the crimes. Post's identification remains controversial and uncorroborated by primary authorities. Other suspects have circulated in true crime lore: Rick Marshall, Lawrence Kane, Richard Gajkowski, Ross Sullivan, and Louis Joseph Myers among them. Each has had brushes with suspicion, though none ultimately presented a conclusive link. Many were ruled out through verified alibis, forensic mismatches, or insufficient evidence. The proliferation of suspects reflects both the complexity of the case and the intense public and media interest that has generated numerous theories, some more credible than others. Adding to law enforcement's challenges were abundant false leads and hoax letters purportedly from the Zodiac. These distractions overwhelmed resources and complicated the investigative landscape. The killer's public persona fed into this chaos, as does the modern influx of speculation and amateur sleuthing, which, while sometimes helpful, has also produced misinformation and dead ends. The Zodiac's open invitation to a game of wits with the public transformed the pursuit into a multifaceted battle involving police, media, and the collective imagination. The Zodiac Killer was more than a murderer. He was an enigma who exploited public fear, technological gaps, and the limitations of his pursuers. Law enforcement was not merely hunting a killer, they were chasing a shadow crafted with deliberate cunning and psychological mastery. The hunt revealed the profound challenges of policing a figure whose identity was cloaked in layers of cryptic messages, self-aggrandizing myth, and elusive evidence. Despite decades of dedication, collaboration between agencies, evolving forensic science, and exhaustive public involvement, the Zodiac's true identity remains a haunting mystery. The relentless pursuit of this shadow figure continues to the present day, emblematic of the broader struggle to solve one of America's most chilling and inscrutable crimes. From a foundation of 5 confirmed victims, the Zodiac Killer's dark legacy extends into a tangled web of potential, yet unproven crimes and theories that continue to perplex investigators and captivate the public imagination. Beyond the known murders in Northern California between 1968 and 1969 lies a shadowy expanse of unsolved mysteries and claims of additional victims that invite both scrutiny and speculation. Among the most discussed potential victims is Cherie Jo Bates, an 18-year-old college student stabbed to death in Riverside, California, in October 1966, 2 years before the Zodiac's confirmed first attack. The connection to the Zodiac was suggested 4 years later when a letter, bearing similarities in handwriting and tone to those attributed to him, hinted at Riverside activity. The case offered eerie parallels to Zodiac's modus operandi, fueling debate among true crime enthusiasts and investigators alike. Yet official agencies, including Riverside authorities, have maintained that Cherie Jo Bates is not a confirmed Zodiac victim, underscoring the uncertainty that permeates cases on the periphery of the confirmed murders. Similarly enigmatic is the case of Donna Lass, a registered nurse who disappeared from State Line, Nevada, in September 1970. Months later, a cryptic postcard was mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle, marked with the Zodiac's infamous crosshair symbol and containing puzzling phrases. Many interpreted this as a taunting claim of responsibility for her disappearance. While her remains were only identified by DNA decades later, as recently as 2023, establishing any definitive Zodiac connection remains beyond reach. This ambiguity feeds an enduring puzzle, whether these acts and vanishings represent the expanding reach of the Zodiac or unrelated tragedies co-opted into the mythos through hopeful or fearful association. The narrative grows more complex when considering other figures like Kathleen Johns. In March 1970, Johns described an abduction scenario strikingly similar to Zodiac's behavioral patterns, an offer to fix a loose tire, followed by coercion and a perilous escape. When shown a police sketch after a high-profile murder, Kathleen immediately identified her abductor as the same man. The Zodiac himself mentioned a kidnapping in his letters, further blurring the lines between confirmed crimes and alleged acts. Beyond individual cases, investigators have examined clusters of unsolved murders and disappearances, sometimes labeled as astrological murders, a moniker inspired by the Zodiac's use of celestial symbols and references. These cases span late 1960s and early 1970s California, featuring similarly brutal forms of violence, pre-cut restraints, and occasional use of .22 caliber ammunition, hallmarks associated with the Zodiac's known crime scenes. Yet the lack of conclusive evidence has left these clusters tantalizingly suspect but officially unconnected. The killer's own words add to this fog of uncertainty. In a letter dated November 9, 1969, the Zodiac declared he would no longer announce his murders, shifting toward crimes disguised as routine robberies, killings of anger, and a few fake accidents. Such a tactical evolution would greatly complicate efforts to identify further victims, effectively cloaking his extended victimology in deliberate ambiguity. This shift from proclaimed, taunting declarations to subtle, disguised acts not only deepened the mystery but expanded the territory of possible crimes. It challenged investigators to distinguish random violent acts from those connected to the Zodiac's signature psychological and operational patterns. Without the killer's signature letters, attacks could be lost among thousands of unsolved cases, and victims may remain unknown or unlinked. This self-imposed veil of secrecy feeds endless cycles of investigation and theory, fertile ground for amateur sleuths and experts to sift through evidence, searching for patterns or clues overlooked before. At the heart of this ambiguity is the Zodiac's contradictory nature, a murderer craving recognition but now veiling his crimes to evade detection. This paradox has emboldened curiosity and speculation. Enthusiasts pore over old case files, searching for overlooked links. Researchers analyze cryptic letters, handwriting, ballistic evidence, and witness testimonies for new connections. The ambiguity transforms the Zodiac from a mere serial killer into a cultural enigma, a dark shadow looming over Northern California's past and the collective imagination ever since. No definitive list of extended victims exists, and the very concept of expanded victimology rests heavily on circumstantial evidence, unconfirmed claims, and the killer's own inconsistent communications. Some potential victims, including couples like Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, found shot on a California beach in 1963 with strikingly similar methods, remain tantalizing possibilities yet officially unconfirmed. Other strange cases involving disappearances or murders with overlapping details complicate the narrative further, weaving a complex tapestry of possible Zodiac acts disguised amid a sea of unsolved crimes. The enduring fascination with these unsolved mysteries underscores the restless human desire for closure in the face of uncertainty. The Zodiac's elusive identity and shifting tactics have left an open wound in criminal history, one that resists healing or definitive answers. Each new theory, every speculative connection, serves as a reminder of a killer who refused to be pinned down, whose crimes expanded beyond known shores into the realm of legend and speculation. As investigations continue, buoyed by advances in forensic science and the relentless passion of amateur detectives, the boundary between fact and theory remains delicately poised. The Beyond the Known chapter of the Zodiac case is an invitation to grapple with the complexities of an unresolved enigma, a reflection of a relentless predator who played both the hunter and the ghost. This murky terrain, laden with unanswered questions and tantalizing leads, ensures that the story is far from over and that the shadows cast by the Zodiac will linger well beyond his confirmed path of destruction. The Zodiac Killer's dark shadow extends far beyond the brutal crimes of the late 1960s. His legacy is etched deep into American culture and the very fabric of true crime history, a haunting puzzle that continues to fascinate, frighten, and inspire. Unlike many serial killers who fade into obscurity over time, the Zodiac's name and the mystery of his identity remain vivid and omnipresent more than 5 decades later. The impact of the Zodiac Killer on popular culture is profound and varied. His chilling story has inspired films, television shows, and documentaries that both fictionalize and rigorously chronicle the case. One of the earliest and most notable examples is the 1971 film Dirty Harry, starring Clint Eastwood. Although fictional, the film draws heavily from the Zodiac's crimes, featuring a serial killer called Scorpio who, like the real Zodiac, taunts police and threatens children. This film cemented the killer's place in the American imagination as a symbol of elusive menace. More recently, David Fincher's 2007 film Zodiac renewed widespread public interest. This meticulously researched cinematic portrayal brought the chilling details of the investigations and the enduring ambiguity of the killer's identity to a new generation. The film deeply explores not just the crimes themselves, but also the obsessive nature of those attempting to solve them, highlighting the toll on investigators and amateur sleuths alike. Television series have also drawn heavily from the Zodiac mythos. Shows like Criminal Minds, American Horror Story, and Psych have woven elements of the Zodiac's dread influence, his cryptic ciphers, taunting messages, and shadowy figure into their narratives, underscoring how the Zodiac story resonates as a cultural archetype of the remorseless, cunning predator who plays a psychological game with society and law enforcement. Documentaries such as Netflix's This Is the Zodiac Speaking continue to dissect evidence and theories, keeping the public dialogue active and inviting new forensic analyses and perspectives. Why does the Zodiac Killer continue to captivate public consciousness so powerfully? Psychologically, the appeal lies in a blend of fascination with the unsolved and the killer's own narcissistic game with society. The Zodiac orchestrated an elaborate puzzle, tantalizing law enforcement, media, and the public with ciphers that promised secrets and with letters that both threatened and provoked. This enigmatic dance created a macabre narrative that transcended his crimes. The unresolved nature of his identity leaves an irresistible mystery. The public is drawn into the challenge of decoding his messages and confronting a villain who both reveals and hides himself. This paradox heightens the morbid allure, as terror is cloaked in intellect and mystery rather than mere brutality alone. Moreover, the Zodiac's psychological manipulation, his deliberate construction of a persona through letters and cryptograms, turns the case into a nearly theatrical performance of terror. His pleasure in outwitting authorities and controlling the narrative fuels what criminologists term duping delight, and it invites the public into a shadowy game where the unknown adversary remains ever out of reach. This element ensures the killer's story never lies dormant. It is continually retold, re-examined, and reinvigorated. In the modern era, the case remains strikingly active. Podcasts dedicated to the Zodiac Killer provide in-depth exploration, analysis, and updates, fostering communities of listeners who engage with the case as an ongoing intellectual and investigative pursuit. Amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts, empowered by access to vast online archives and forums, tirelessly pore over evidence, debate suspects, and collaborate on theories. Their dedication has propelled the case into the digital age, keeping public interest alive and vibrant. Advances in forensic science also hold promise for eventual resolution. While DNA technology and genetic genealogy were unavailable during the initial investigation, today's breakthroughs offer renewed hope. Authorities continue to re-examine old evidence, applying modern techniques that could finally lift the veil on the Zodiac's identity. These scientific strides, combined with persistent public engagement, inject a sense of cautious optimism into a case long considered cold. Ultimately, the Zodiac Killer's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of an unresolved enigma, a story where fear, fascination, and the impulse to understand converge. His crimes were horrifying, but it is the undying mystery, the psychological complexity, and the cultural imprint that ensure the Zodiac Killer remains an indelible figure in American consciousness. As the search continues, so does the collective hope that one day the silence will be broken, revealing the truth behind the shadows he cast so long ago. For over 50 years, the Zodiac Killer has remained one of the most confounding figures in true crime history, a specter who prowled Northern California in the late 1960s, leaving behind a trail of death, coded messages, and unanswered questions. What is it about this elusive criminal that allowed him to slip through the grasp of law enforcement for so long? Why, despite an intense, decades-long manhunt, has the Zodiac's true identity never been conclusively revealed? To understand this enduring mystery, we must look closely at the unique combination of factors that shielded him from capture and cemented his place in the annals of unsolved crime. The first barrier to the Zodiac's identification was the stark reality of forensic science as it existed in the 1960s. Unlike modern investigations, which rely heavily on DNA analysis and advanced crime scene processing, investigators of that era faced significant limitations. The technology simply did not exist to extract or analyze the genetic material that might have pointed to a suspect. Biological evidence, blood, saliva on stamps and envelopes, or other trace materials, was collected without the foresight that it could one day be tested with far more precise tools of science. Moreover, evidence preservation protocols were primitive by today's standards, often resulting in contaminated or degraded samples. Fingerprint analysis was in use but far less sophisticated, and it was further complicated by the killer's calculated measures to avoid leaving physical traces. Indeed, the Zodiac Killer demonstrated a meticulous awareness of forensic countermeasures. Eyewitness accounts, survivor testimonies, and crime scene reconstructions indicate he frequently wore gloves, effectively leaving minimal usable fingerprints. He varied his choice of weaponry, from a .22 caliber pistol to a 9mm, and later a knife, and altered his methods, ranging from surprise vehicle attacks on vulnerable couples to a chilling, ritualistic stabbing while cloaked in a hood. This adaptability, shifting his modus operandi, kept investigators perpetually off balance, unable to pin down a precise profile from consistent behavioral patterns. Each crime scene bore hallmarks of careful planning, minimal physical evidence, and a deliberate masking of his identity. Adding yet another layer of complexity was the Zodiac's psychological approach to his crimes and the investigation. Rather than merely seeking to kill, he sought control over the narrative, over the fear he instilled, and over the very authorities pursuing him. His cryptic letters, coded messages, and taunts mailed to major newspapers transformed a murder investigation into a public spectacle. These communications were not impulsive outbursts, they were meticulously crafted psychological weapons designed to manipulate both law enforcement and the wider community. He insisted his letters be published, threatening further violence if ignored, forcing the media into reluctant collaboration that amplified his infamy. The Zodiac's correspondence revealed a highly intelligent, narcissistic individual who craved recognition and dominance, yet simultaneously guarded his true identity with extraordinary care. His ciphers, complex puzzles that confounded professional cryptographers for decades, became iconic components of the case. They were puzzles embedded with false leads and deliberate deception, reflecting what behavioral experts term duping delight, the sadistic pleasure derived from outsmarting others. Even when some of his ciphers were eventually solved, they offered no definitive name or trace to an identity, but instead reinforced his image as a manipulative mastermind who controlled the terms of engagement. The investigative pursuit was further hampered by jurisdictional fragmentation. The Zodiac's crimes spanned multiple counties and cities: Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, and San Francisco, each with their own police departments, differing investigative protocols, and variable levels of communication and cooperation. This multi-jurisdictional patchwork complicated the sharing of information and the coordination necessary for a cohesive investigation. It allowed gaps in surveillance and suspect tracking that the killer exploited. Compounding these official challenges was the role of the public, both beneficial and detrimental. The Zodiac case quickly captured the imagination of an anxious populace and the media, inspiring widespread fear and fascination. Amateur sleuths emerged, some contributing significant breakthroughs such as the initial decipherment of the Zodiac's complex codes. However, this flood of public attention also generated countless false leads, hoax letters, and speculative theories that drained police resources and muddied the investigative waters. In a case where the killer himself spurred a public game, separating fact from fiction became a Herculean task. Together, these factors created a perfect storm that has kept the Zodiac Killer an unresolved enigma. The forensic tools of the time were insufficient to capture genetic evidence that might have solved the case decades ago. The killer's cunning and meticulous approach minimized physical traces and foiled straightforward profiling. His psychological manipulation crafted a narrative that kept authorities and the public perpetually chasing shadows, while jurisdictional hurdles blunted law enforcement's collective response. Meanwhile, the public, enthralled and terrified, became both an unwitting partner and impediment in the investigation. This unresolved mystery continues to captivate because it embodies the intersection of human intellect, cruelty, and the limitations of justice. The Zodiac Killer's legacy is not only in the lives he tragically ended, but also in the puzzle he left behind, a puzzle that eludes full resolution even with modern forensic advances and the dedicated efforts of both officials and amateurs alike. His story is a chilling reminder of how the nature of crime, psychology, and technology can intertwine to produce a shadow that lingers long after the initial terror fades. As the investigation moves forward in the digital age, with DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, enhanced forensic science, and global collaborative efforts, there remains cautious hope that the silent clues of the past may yet speak loud enough to finally unmask the Zodiac. Until that day comes, the killer's calculated silence and elusive identity remain a haunting testament to a case that reshaped how we understand crime, media, and the enduring allure of an unsolved enigma.